My name is Richard Coit, and I serve as the Executive Director and General Counsel for the South Dakota Telecommunications Association. We are one of the hosts of this conference, and we would like to thank you all very much for attending and participating. I am pleased that I have the opportunity to serve as the moderator, not a speaker, for those of you who know me. You'll be somewhat relieved by that, of this first panel. And with this first panel, what we're going to do is we're going to explore two companies' perspectives on how they are using the NIST framework to minimize cybersecurity risk and best position themselves for cybersecurity attacks, for response to cybersecurity attacks. The companies participating on this panel include first Nsight Teleservices of northeastern Wisconsin, and they are a rural communications carrier with a long history. They're very diversified in their service offerings, and they offer both wireline and wireless telecommunications and IP services. Secondly, we have SDN Communications, also one of the hosts of this conference. I assume that most of you are familiar with SDN. SDN is a rural carrier-owned provider of a statewide and regional, Midwest regional fiber network, providing a host of IP and TDM transport services to not only its member companies, many other carriers, wholesale, retail customers, and so on. I'm going to start with an introduction of the individual panelists for these two companies, and then I'm going to give each panelist 10 minutes or so to provide some background about their companies, and also to provide some background as to how they have started using the framework and how are they continuing to use the framework in their operations. So with that, I'm going to start with Kathleen Whitbeck of Nsight.
Okay, so thank you, Rich. Yep, been in the industry for a really long time. I am a network operations girl through and through. At the end of the day, I want to go make it real and make it work and never let it break is what my team really does. So the cybersecurity aspect of never let it break is where I gravitate, and I dabble in the policy stuff, but I always come back to the real world. So we are about a company in Wisconsin, about 700 employees. It's really, the sweet spot is in that Green Bay area, the Fox cities, all the way up to Upper Michigan. We have 13 wire centers, so when we say rural ILEC, we understand rural ILEC. We have 13 wire centers only because we've merged with a couple of our neighboring rural telcos, so we've grown recently. We have some CLEC services in the area, a fiber network that we leverage for both our CLEC customers and our wireless network. And then the big piece is really in the wireless space, where we've got a couple 100,000 customers. We've been in that market since before the big guys even thought about going into that market, so we had some early market share there. We're a CDMA network. We're an LRA partner of Verizon, so offering 4G services via their network. We have our own tower company, so we do our own tower work up to 500 feet. And if there are any runners, I would invite you up in the next couple of weeks. The Cellcom Green Bay Marathon that we sponsor actually does go through the stadium, so you can run around the ring. From a network management, cybersecurity perspective, there are a couple things that I think we've been doing that have been very helpful for us in getting into the framework and helping the organization start to really develop that cybersecurity awareness. One of them has been our participation in Homeland Security's National Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Center, the NCIC, where we've got kind of like, you think about the FCC as our regulatory body, you have DHS, that is the cybersecurity resilience body. And so participating in that has been helpful for us as a small carrier to get visibility to some of these things that are coming down the pipe at us. The other one has been through the FCC, the CISRIC stuff, being able to see what's coming. So our early indicators with the framework, we actually heard about it before we got to version 1 and had an opportunity to do some really informal testing with it, if you will, or exploring with it. I pulled together, after one of my team meetings, we had an all engineering department meeting, and I spent 10 minutes talking about cybersecurity. People had seen things in the news and what did all that mean and what did that mean for us, and what started to happen is engineers started self-identifying that, well, yeah, they were a closet hacker, or gee, they took classes and they were really interested in it. And so I started with that community of really interested folks to start having a discussion about where do we have opportunities, what is this thing, the framework, how can we give our friends at NIST some feedback on what does this mean for small carriers. And we'll talk about kind of how we've grown that over the last couple years.
My name is Carrie Johnson, and I work as the Manager of Government and External Relations at SDN. And while Nikki is pulling up the slides, I'll just give you, again, a bit of background about SDN. We are a business-to-business broadband provider, and we serve customers in South Dakota, Minnesota, Iowa, and our network as a whole extends into 8 states throughout the upper Midwest. In addition to providing that broadband service, we also offer a host of different cybersecurity managed security products, including managed firewall, router, remote network monitoring, a distributed denial of service protection product, and then secure data storage at our La Mesa data center. And so to kick off the presentation, I'm borrowing an image from Norman Rockwell, who's one of my favorite artists. And this is, I think, how quite a few companies feel when they are on the precipice looking down at starting this process. Even though Matt said that it's an easy breezy 18 or 19 page document, you're like, oh, I got this covered. But then you click this Excel document and you see, oh wow, there's 5 functions, 20 plus categories, 98 subcategories, and we're supposed to go through this, figure out what is our current score, what is our target score. There's a slew of informative references that we should also dive into. So it can be a little intimidating. But I would just say to everyone sitting here that starting really is the hardest part. And once you assemble your team and just get the ball going, I think you're going to be surprised by that it's a lot less painful than you might fear at the very beginning. Some important components that really helped SDN was that we had strong buy-in and support and direction from our executive leadership. In the task force that was formed, our vice president of legal participated. We had a number of our directors from network, operations, IT, and then also coming from the very top with Mark Shalana, our CEO, making a clear message to all involved that this needs to be a priority. And so as the person designated with kind of herding the cats and scheduling the meetings, that was really helpful, having that strong statement of support from our executive leadership. So again, I think it is important to task someone in your organization as taking ownership of working through the framework. One other important piece is assembling your team. Kathleen talked about some of the folks she included, and we at SDN tried to have a broad mix of multifunctional departments being involved in the conversation. And as we started working through the framework, we would stumble upon a new category or a new subcategory, a new control, and say, oh, shoot, we need to loop that person in. So actually Cassie, who's sitting up here today, she was left off the first meeting, but when we first started working through the framework, we realized we were reading things about asset management and response, and we quickly realized we needed our business continuity disaster recovery person, and so we looped Cassie in. And then next step is developing the template, figuring out how are we going to make this work for our organization. And so again, you've already seen this image in a number of different presentations, but going through, your organization will work through the identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. It's broken into 22 categories, 98 subcategories, and then you have a host of different references that you can also use. And one of the things, as you're beginning to get started, assembling your team, figuring out kind of your plan of attack to work through this, I think the first place that you should go is the NIST website. There's a really useful industry resources page, and I've highlighted a couple of those. I'm going to try not to blind my fellow panelists with this laser pointer, but one of the pieces that I highlighted was Intel Corporation did a really useful use case on how what approach they took to work through the framework. And we're lucky, tomorrow we have the chief author, the lead author of that report will be talking to us. And so I won't get too much into that. But then also Booz Allen Hamilton, they really also put together a useful report. And one of the pieces that we then kind of took from that or kind of borrowed from their process was a scoring methodology for our tiers. And so they broke down starting from 0 all the way to 100 of levels of implementation. So how mature are you in a certain control? And so we thought that that was really helpful as we kind of worked to figure out, okay, where are we currently, what is our current score, and using that numerical value, and then what is our target, where do we want to go? And so I would just say you don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of great use cases and guidance already out there that I would strongly recommend. This is one of your first places as you're beginning this process. Also on that page is going to be the CISRIC guidance, and you have heard CISRIC being referenced a number of times, and the FCC has a working group that was tasked with how do we take this document, these best practices, this guidance that NIST put out, and how do we apply it to the communications industry? And they broke down their chapters by industry segment. So you have tailored guidance if you're within the broadcast industry, if you're a wireline provider, if you're a wireless operator, and then also a tailored chapter specifically for small and mid-sized organizations. And the piece that we really found very useful from those chapters was that it lists in a table, so the table, it's hard to read there, but it lists what are the high priority controls that these, if you're a wireline provider, you better really have your bases covered with these controls. And so we found that very, very useful. And again, it can be intimidating. The CISRIC guidance is about 400 pages. But it becomes more manageable when you open it up, you just see your index, oh, I'm going to jump to the wireline section. We fall into the small, mid-sized category. I'm going to jump to that chapter. And it really has some helpful recommendations. And so this is the basic template that SDN used. And we definitely did borrow from others. And so this kind of right here, the yellow, we went through the NIST Cyber Framework Excel doc and highlighted those high priority areas that were flagged within the CISRIC report. And then we used, for our current score and target score, the Booz Allen Hamilton scoring methodology that really helped us figure out, okay, what tier do we fall in? Are we at tier 3? Are we at tier 2? So that was really helpful for us to quantify and figure out what would our current score, target score. And then you're also going to be hearing from Jeff England tomorrow from Silverstar. And we had talked with Jeff, and he had participated in an NTCA, that's our National Trade Association, in a webinar, and had suggested that companies, as they're working through the framework, you might as well just list what level of investment is filling that gap going to require. A single dollar sign, $2 signs, $3 signs. And that was a really helpful piece of information because when we had finally worked through our initial crash course, working through the framework, we were able to identify the low-hanging fruit and recognizing, oh wow, this is maybe a gap that is one of these yellow highlighted areas, and it's a single dollar sign. So that's you know, a pretty quick win or victory that we can improve our cybersecurity program. And in total, working through the framework required about 3 to 4 one-hour sessions. And so again, it really is not as ominous or foreboding as you might expect, that we really found it to be quite useful and really guided some very constructive discussion. And then I should also say, so here's where the informative references section. And so when we were working through the framework, if there would be a question on what are they getting at, you know, how is this control different from that control? We could then refer to that informative references section and kind of get a better sense of, okay, what were they getting at? And so that's another helpful tool. And so when we ultimately finished working through our initial crash course of the framework, assigning ourselves, you know, our current score, target score, we felt largely that we fell in the risk-informed, repeatable, but really, you know, where we're hoping to go is then getting to that tier 4, adaptive. You know, one of the other things that was kind of a nice, pleasant surprise is that as we worked through this, we realized that we were already doing much of what they were already recommending. Again, being a business-to-business broadband service provider, our customers demand and expect, and for us to be competitive in the markets where we operate, we were already following and reviewing many of the government and industry standards that NIST is built upon, whether that's PCI, SOC 1 and 2, HIPAA, recommendations from the FCC and FTC. And so again, by being kind of a good proactive actor, we were pleasantly surprised to see that, oh, great, you know, we're already on top of this, but maybe there was a piece of that informative reference to say, hey, we could, you know, take our existing cybersecurity program to that next level. And so as far as our next steps go, one of our you know, first plan of attack is creating a security committee at SDN. And so one of the real virtues of the NIST framework is getting conversations about cybersecurity outside of just the IT department and really extending that across the organization. And so we are tasking a team that will bear that responsibility and will be overseeing our own company's efforts to work through you know, following through with, okay, where are maybe some of our gap areas, where can we improve, and tracking our progress. That committee is also going to be responsible for looking at what are ways that we can continue to extend and promote a culture of cybersecurity. So based upon, you know, our existing cybersecurity program, we had, you know, we already have cyber policies in place, but what can we do to really raise awareness and promote them and make them accessible across the organization? One other piece would be cyber literacy. There's a lot of really helpful, useful tips in the NIST cyber framework that we recognize as good food for thought and new ways that we can improve upon what we're already doing. One example is with phishing tests. So we already send emails out to our employees and seeing, you know, how many people get tricked into opening an attachment that, you know, fortunately these emails are from our IT department, but we want to start training people to be on the lookout for suspicious emails. Well, one idea that the NIST cyber framework in those informative references sections includes is track who opens it, and then provide targeted training. And so that's kind of a new piece that yes, we were already doing those phishing tests, but the NIST cyber framework helped us recognize, okay, how do we take our cyber literacy programs to that next level? Another piece that we also were prompted to look closer at is our supply chain and what type of questions are we asking of vendors, prospective vendors, those who are renewing a contract. So that's another key takeaway that we're working on implementing at SDN. And then lastly, The NIST cybersecurity framework helped us realize that we could improve our existing business continuity disaster recovery program by including a stronger focus on cybersecurity incidents. A cyber incident represents a disaster if you have a cyber breach occur. And so that's another area that we're going to be working through. And I asked Cassie to join me up here. She's our BCDR expert. And I think that looking at BCDR, it's kind of a proven process that many of our companies are already aware of, but maybe up to this point, we have largely focused on what is our response in the event of a tornado or a fire. But really, one way to apply NIST to your organization is using that existing process that you have by updating BCDR. So Cassie's going to be sharing about BCDR and then our own company's plans for updating it.
Thank you, Carrie. Again, I'm Cassie Baldwin, and I manage the 24/7/365 call center for SDN, and I also manage the BCDR program. So what is BCDR and why are we talking about it today? Well, BCDR is an acronym for Business Continuity and Disaster Recovery, and any type of cybersecurity breach would be considered a disaster. So business continuity and disaster recovery are also often considered the same, one and the same, but they're really two different concepts. Business continuity refers to the processes that ensure your critical business functions continue during a disaster. And disaster recovery then refers to the process of getting back to normal day-to-day activity after a disaster has struck. So it's often hard to identify what is a business critical function. So some of those things that we kind of decided were that the function directly helps achieve the company's mission. It provides a vital service to our clients or customers. It supports another vital business critical function. It generates a significant amount of revenue, and it must be resumed within 12 hours. And that 12 hours is not a set number. That's really a number that your own organization can set depending on your type of organization, what you provide, what your service level agreements are, etc. So why is business continuity and disaster recovery important? There's staggering statistics about why each company should have a plan, but one of the biggest ones is 87% of companies that lose access to their corporate data for more than 7 days go out of business within a year. I'll let you read the rest of the statistics, but I think we're all pretty attuned in South Dakota to weather-related disasters. And in fact, starting on Christmas Eve of 2009 through 2010, South Dakota had a presidential disaster declaration 7 times in that 12-month stretch. And our governor activated the Emergency Operations Center 3 times in that 12 months as well. In that 12-month stretch, 56 of 66 South Dakota counties were designated as a disaster at one time in that year. And the cost to infrastructure was about $130 million. So we're prepared for those. We need to get more prepared for the things that we don't see as easily. We don't see the cyber attacks where we see the snow, the blizzards, the winds. When we activate our plan, we enter into the incident command structure, which is also the structure that most local, state, federal governments enter into. And it really helps provide guidance, clear role definition so that chaos is lessened in those times of disaster. And again, for your business continuity plan, it's essential to have your support of your senior management team. Thankfully, we at SDN do. Our CEO, Mark Shalanta, took all of these roles and we identified certain scenarios that we think would be likely to happen at SDN. We then took those scenarios and took each role and layered them 3 deep so that anytime we have, for instance, a fire in the building, we know who our incident commander is, who our logistics chief is, who the safety officer is, and if those people should be out of the office, we know who that backup person is. And again, it just really helps organize and clearly defines roles, because when you enter into an incident command structure, your day-to-day roles go out the window. The vice president of finance might become the logistics person who's getting sandwiches to make sure that everybody is nourished. In a recent article from techtarget.com, they took the framework from NIST and the categories and kind of mapped it out to show how your BCDR plan can enhance the framework and vice versa. So really what we're kind of looking at now for the identify is we have contracted with our consultant, Moss Adams, and we will be entering into a 12-month contract with them to review our risk assessment and do a risk assessment, update that, find out where our vulnerabilities are. We'll also then go into the protect mode. We, especially after listening to Professor Pauli today, I think we need to do a better job of training and awareness. The training once every 2 or 3 months just apparently does not stick with people, so we'll be adjusting how often we do some training on that. For detection in our organization, our Network Surveillance Center is staffed 24/7, 365, and they are constantly monitoring anomalies, strange things on our network. They're always watching it. Once they find one of those, they can either mitigate an attack, escalate it to another area, but we're always monitoring the network for strange things happening. And our response and recover, again, anytime something happens, we handle the issue. We do have plans in place already. But afterwards, and one of the most important things that many companies miss is after an incident happens is getting together and doing what they call a hot wash. And basically what that means is you all get together, sit down, you talk about what worked, what didn't work, how to fill the gaps of those things that didn't work, and really identifying where your holes are and how to fill those. So again, our business continuity plan, we have discovered is proven successful. It engages critical stakeholders. It gets our employees thinking about things. We give just virtual scenarios for them. For instance, we've had active shooter training come in, and we didn't want people running through the halls screaming, "Active shooter, active shooter." But we did ask for people to go back to their desks and take a look at if there was an active shooter that came in. Plan your routes out 2 different ways, and then throw some different things in there. Okay, you're going to this door. What if that door is blocked? What are you going to do then? So it really just gets people thinking about what they need to do and how they need to react. We update our plan annually. Again, that's somewhat of a daunting task because there's a lot of documentation with a business continuity plan, but it needs to be done. So, and it also, of course, then reduces impact on our business. We know what to do, we know how to react, we know who the major players are, who our major resources and critical resources are. So it's really just helped us in the organization of things. So in the time of a disaster, we're not trying to figure out who's doing what and how we're reacting. So our next steps. One of the things that we have recently accomplished is we gathered several of our member companies and performed a multi-member company BCDR exercise, and we found that very beneficial. So we want to continue with that group. We're going to continue with them with cybersecurity, with training. We'll be training our staff, updating plans, and making cybersecurity a much more bigger part of our business continuity plan. So that's about all I have to say. Thank you.
First, I guess I would ask Kathleen from Nsight. I see the framework as offering a roadmap that companies can follow if they want to establish a new cybersecurity risk management program or just wish to improve their current program. Looking at the design and content of the framework, what would you see as its particular strengths?
You know, for us, because we started in this whole process when the framework was really in its infancy, we started very informally. And it was just a series of maybe 1-hour meetings, pulling some technical resources together to say, what is this? We went through the different categories and had a discussion around them. And there was a lot of good dialogue and exchange just through that process. People saying, what is this? Well, we think we're okay. It was interesting to watch all the engineers who kind of thought we were at tier 1 and 2, and well, maybe we should be at 3 and 4. And going through that process got a lot of people thinking, and it got the dialogue started. And from there, we've grown over the last couple of years into a much more organized, formal, with structure, with officers who are sponsors. And the framework itself has simply been a tool to leverage what we're already doing.
So you would say then, Kathleen, that it kind of helped to improve the communication and brought maybe a higher priority within the company to having an organized plan?
Yeah, it helped us to articulate. So in some areas you're already doing, you get into the IT organization, you're doing PCI compliance, you don't need to toss out all the verbiage you know about PCI and what you're doing there to insert the framework on top of it. You just simply need to help support. In other parts of the business where maybe we didn't have that, this was a way to get some common language and to be able to go back and say, these are the things that need to be in our capital plan. These are the things that, gee, this is low-hanging fruit and we just need to find a little discipline to get it done.
Carrie or Cassie, you have any comments as to strengths of the framework?
Yeah, well, I would say, its flexibility is really valuable where you can really develop and kind of work through the framework in a way that addresses your own company's needs and addresses your unique threats. I think one of the greatest strengths is that, again, SDN was already working through and reviewing a host of different compliance standards. But sometimes with cybersecurity, your organization can kind of get in this check the box approach. And what Celia was talking about is risk management and really, having the constructive dialogue and evaluating, what are we doing? Are we covering our bases? What could we do better? And also encouraging the organization to have involvement from their executive leadership, involvement across the organization beyond IT, so that it can really break down barriers. And when we had this team of people together, they thought, well, here's what network's doing, but here's what IT's doing, and kind of having that dialogue really was useful in letting us think constructively about what we're doing and what do we need to put in place in order to get to that target.
I would add to that it gave us more direction and more purpose and almost increased our urgency because we know that these threats are not going to stop. They're going to get more complicated. So we really wanted to try to nip this in the bud and try to get a handle on this beforehand. We realize that the hackers are probably always going to be 2 steps ahead of us, but again, it kind of keeps us on task as well.
Okay, next question, and this relates to something that often comes up in discussions that I have with those in the telecommunications industry, particularly from smaller rural carriers related to cybersecurity. There is a concern, obviously, about the resources that they can put to any particular task, the cost, and so forth. The framework is structured as a flexible implementation document and is intended to assist companies in aligning their cybersecurity program with their particular business requirements, risk, and resources. How does your company, and I would ask Kathleen first again, how does your company use the framework to assist specifically in ensuring that its decisions and actions related to managing cybersecurity or responding to cybersecurity threats are cost effective? In other words, they take into account the risk level and available financial resources.
And available people resources, because everybody's busy. I'll give you the Cliff Notes version. You really want to go to that CISRIC Working Group 4 document to the carrier section and find the one that goes for you, because there was a lot of work by a lot of folks in the industry to identify or to pare down. You've got 96 categories and subcategories and all of these things, and the spreadsheet will kind of blow your brain out. But they went down to, these are the ones that we really think are the most important for carriers. And then they went even a step further. So we know in IT it's PCI and it's credit cards and it's all the PII, the personally identifying information around our customers. In the network space, it's really the protected critical infrastructure. So what are the most important components in your network? You've got tons of routers and switches and fiber and you got everything out there. How do you secure it and how do you start taking a layered approach to it? So there was some work a while ago among the carriers to understand what are the most important things. Your signaling network, your core routing, your core switching, your HSS, all of those components. And so it goes through from an architecture perspective and helps you prioritize what are the things that you want to evaluate first. Because you'd love to fix it all this week, but you're not going to get that done this year. So starting with the core and working your way out. And it starts to become pretty apparent when you start looking at it where you've got some opportunities. If you've got any network elements with admin or the generic password, that's the first thing you go fix this week. But then you start working your way out and you just methodically go through it and you take it as you can. I mean, you're going to see things as you go through this evaluation and you're going to say, yeah, I can let that wait. That's a risk we're going to have a discussion about and we're going to put that in our plan. And there are other things you're going to say, I think we better get the vendor in here and we better do something about it now. But kind of taking that methodical look at your network helps you figure out where to go next and to do it in a way that doesn't overwhelm your staff.
Yeah, and I definitely agree. I think for our industry, the telecom industry, the CISRIC report was really useful in helping us prioritize what should be our next steps. What areas do we really need to focus on? But thinking about the very beginning of this meeting, there were a number of hands raised from industries outside of the telecom industry. And by visiting the NIST resources page, the industry resources page, other agencies have, such as Department of Energy, have created tailored guidance for the electric industry, that goes for healthcare, other critical infrastructure operators. And so I would say, looking at that tailored guidance is a good place to start. And what also helped us with kind of assessing where are we going to be placing resources, what are we going to be prioritizing, was including that basic estimate of what level of investment would this require for us to address that gap. And that was useful in helping us find where are the low-hanging fruits, that we can have a quick victory, that we can really see some very deliverable, constructive improvements made. So I think that was another helpful tool that we incorporated, thanks to, again, Silver Star's idea that they had incorporated into their process.
And I think I would take a more even basic approach to it. I think it's either you pay now or you pay later. And when you can pay now, when you're organized and not under chaos and duress, it's going to go a lot smoother. If you wait and something happens, it's going to be chicken with your heads cut off.
The next question I have, the next question I have relates to the fact that, the framework is intended for use, obviously, by, different critical infrastructure providers and different entities outside of infrastructure providers. And I was just wondering if you could, any of you could provide an example of where the framework has helped your company in communicating with other entities or individuals outside your company on cybersecurity matters, if you have an example.
I do happen to. Yes, indeed. The first thing you do when you look at the framework, you get to pat yourself on the back because you're going to find that you're doing a lot of these things already. All of the things that we do for good network management and all of the communications sector, carrier to carrier kind of language that we use around them isn't always as understood when you get into other sectors. And had a school district recently who was under DOS attack, and it was one of those kiddie hacker things where for $20 they could DOS their network for 20 minutes and get out of a test. But they were pretty freaked out about the whole thing, and being able to sit down with them, help them understand the context of what was going on, helping to give them some resources. Here's how to reach your research and education ISAC. Here's this thing called the framework, and to be able to start getting to a common language or taxonomy, as NIST says, really was helpful. And I think that's really where the power in the framework becomes. I can talk to the electric company and they know what I'm talking about. They're not hearing communications jitter in the dialogue.
Carrie, Cassie, anything to add?
I would say on the supply chain piece, the framework again provides that useful common language and really forced us or encouraged us to look at, what questions are we asking the vendors? And so that definitely prompted useful external conversations.
I would agree with that, and that's also something that we can introduce into our BCDR plan, and asking you should always be asking your vendors, what are your plans, what are your contingency plans, do you have extra suppliers as well if we can't get to you, those are just basic things covered in your BCDR plan.
Okay, I'm going to ask one last question, and then I am going to open it up for audience participation, and if you don't have any questions, then I'll have some more. My last question, I guess, would be, what overarching advice would you have for any rural infrastructure provider that is either just beginning to look at the framework or is already using the framework? And are there any particular lessons learned through your experience to date that you could pass along? And I'll start with Kathleen on that as well.
Really, it's having that champion. And I think it does need to be somebody kind of in the middle of the mix who is going to be that voice that keeps it going. You know, it's leverage your vendors. They're there, they're selling you things. Make it your next service management meeting to ask, you know, are we using all the security features and are we up to date on all the security features on this switch you sold us? There are so many things that you're doing today that feed and funnel this. And I think if you get the dialogue going or you keep the dialogue going, you can take it to the next level without having to create an entirely new document. The other piece really is, for small businesses, focus on the meat and potatoes. You don't have to be the guy who's going out and cutting and, you know, evaluating the bleeding edge, whatever the cutting edge researchers are focusing on. If you focus on all of those things that you do for good network management, your network hygiene, your patching, your change control. The first time I looked at the cybersecurity framework, I went, well, that's Network Management 101, with just some different words to it. So if you focus on those things, you're gonna take yourself well down the road.
Cassie, anything to add? Yeah.
I would agree with that. Yeah, it's, you know, it can be very daunting when you first get it. When, as Carrie said, I was left out of the first initial meeting, but when she handed me the documents, I thought, oh my gosh, what have I gotten myself into? But as I started reading through it, I discovered that a lot of those points were covered in our BCDR plan, so I relaxed pretty quickly and we just forged ahead then.
Carrie, anything to add on that?
Yeah, and I would just say you don't need to reinvent the wheel. And one thing that I think you know, I had heard from our trade association, you know, visit NIST website. They have a lot of useful resources. And originally, I think I had just kind of in my own little silo read the framework, looked at the Excel doc, tried to go through the informative references section. And when I finally did visit the NIST website, there really are very valuable tools that can give you good food for thought, good guidance, helpful use cases that you can then build into how you plan to approach working through the framework. And so that's something that I would say, really visit that resources page as one of your first steps.
Okay, with that, I'm going to open it up to the audience for any questions.
I suspect most everybody in this room has probably done some sort of a natural disaster BCDR exercise or plan. Do you have any thoughts or suggestions about maybe designing or even just a rudimentary cyber security or cyber attack BCDR exercise?
We did one after the Target breach. We thought, oh, we should maybe, you know, we had a plan for it, but do you ever really sit down and do a tabletop exercise on it? And the exercise itself went just swell, and everybody nodded and agreed, and we were good to go. And then afterward, it started coming out what the detail of the breach was and how that happened. And it did cause us to go back and kind of rethink some of our communication and our decision-making in that whole notification and management process. And I think today, because of that exercise, our CERT process, how we pull people together and how we vet things through the organization when there is a cyber-related thing that we might need to pay attention to, is much stronger. It was well worth it.
That's one of our plans for the year, both internal at SDN and then for the multi-member company organizations that have joined with us. So we will be addressing that, and I'll probably be calling you, Kathleen, to get some information.
I suspect that we're going to hear through a number of presentations here throughout tomorrow that it requires this champion. I've heard you say it already, Kathleen. I'm just curious, from each of your respective organizations, is that champion someone that rests within a senior management role? Is it someone that rests within a risk management role or IT department, or both?
For us, it's network management, it's in the engineering side, and it's a mid-level manager.
Yeah, and us as well, kind of a, yeah, mid-level. We had guidance from our legal department, but then that security committee, that task force that we put together really represented cross-functional roles across the organization. So we had, yeah, network, IT, operations, network surveillance, so we had a broad mix of folks.
From an executive sponsorship, when we started to formalize it, we went with our CTO, our CIO, and a director in our internal audit group. So we had kind of that compliance and financial piece in there. And those three seem to be a really good triad for making sure that each of the groups is doing the things that they need to, and if they get stuck somewhere, that they can get a little push along the way. Internal audit can be your best friend when it comes to getting people to do things you want from a cybersecurity perspective.
Hey, let's give all these panelists a hand.